Hello everyone, and welcome back to Classic Dune. So today I thought I'd do something a little bit different and make a tier list of all the factions in the game. There's 12 of them now. We've got the 6 base factions and then also the 6 added in each of the 3 expansions, 2 each. And they're all pretty crazy. And some of them are far stronger than others. This game employs a lot of self-balancing, so some factions can really stick out here in terms of strength and others in terms of weakness. But, I mean, they all have a good chance of winning depending on what happens. Dune's a pretty crazy game in that way. So I'm just going to grab all these, stick them in a bag, and we'll go randomly just for a little bit of drama. Keep me on my toes. So I've got, standard tiers here, S, A, B, C, D. S tier is going to be factions where it's sort of your game to lose to a degree. S tier factions will generally have a lot of the variables under their control, and they're by no means overpowered, but you can usually, if you play well, you can seal a win. A tier is going to be factions that have good strengths and don't have a lot of weaknesses. In most situations, they'll be able to make something happen. B tier faction is going to be a faction that has good strengths and little to no weaknesses. Just middle of the road, even chance of winning and losing. C tier factions are going to be factions that have some good strengths but significant weaknesses or drawbacks or just something that holds them back from greatness. And then D tier factions are going to be ones that I like to think of as feast or famine. So any faction in Dune can be the strongest at the table if they get into the right scenario. But these D tier factions are usually going to start in that scenario where they're not very strong. Or it'll be very easy for them to slip into a bad state and it might be hard for them to pull themselves out of it. So let's start with, oh boy, ooh, Harkonnen. All right, now I might get some comments for this, but I'm actually going to put the Harkonnen in D tier. And again, like this is a perfect example that there are no bad factions. Like, Harkonnen is certainly a good faction, but they really do get outshined by everyone else at the table. And the main reason why I put them in D tier is that um, their two abilities that really are special would be the advanced leader stealing ability, where they can steal a leader from a faction after they win, and then their ability to keep 4 traitors instead of just one. Other than those two things, they can't really do what other factions can't. So their main thing of getting an extra treachery card and being able to hold 8, that's nice. You have more options at your disposal, more tricks up your sleeve potentially. But it's nothing like, what the Ixians can do with swapping out a card up for bid with one in their hand, or Atreides of knowing what the card is. It's just more of what everyone else has, and it's not something new, some new ability. Um, Harkonnen is. I'm going to alternate between Harkonnen and Harkonnen. It's just, I have no control over it. But Harkonnen, they have to utilize intimidation in the early game. Typically, they'll be able to buy a card or two, and then they'll have a 4 or 6 card hand. That's very scary because it means you're basically guaranteed to have a combat card. And you start with 10 forces on the board, and you start with 10 spice. So usually in the first turn, if the Harkonnen move a bunch of forces onto a spice blow, nobody's going to want to tangle with them. And then especially in the advanced game, where they have the leader steal ability, you're not just going to pick a random skirmish with them for attrition because you're going to be worried about losing your leader. Um, leader still is great for intimidation purposes, but it's just a win more kind of ability. You have to win a fight for you to get use out of it, and they don't really have other abilities that let them win fights. You could argue that the 4 traitors helps with that to a degree, but I mean, traitors are kind of random. You can never really base a strategy around them. All right, next up, Ooh, Ecaz, my personal favorite faction. Um, I'm definitely biased because I really like them, but I'm gonna put Ecaz in A tier. And the reason for that is two main things. So they've got their ambassadors, which add a lot of versatility to their playstyle, and it means that they can make the best of a bad situation, and they can also take a good situation and make it even better. If you put down the right ambassadors at the right time, put down what you need, you can do a lot of crazy stuff. You can never really know what the ECAS are going to pull next. And the other really great thing about House ECAS is their co-occupy ability. So when they do get in an alliance, they have the option of co-occupying with their ally and having their forces in the same territory, which means that you can choose who's going to fight any battle that happens there before you plan. And it also means that you just have more forces. It's going to be harder for people to beat you there. But the great thing about it is that they have the special ability to win with only 3 strongholds in an alliance if they're co-occupied on all 3. And the best part about this is that even if you get attacked in all of your strongholds, that's only 3 battles you have to win instead of 4. And you're more likely to win them because of those reasons I mentioned. And it means that your forces are more densely packed. You know, the 20 forces spread out between 3 strongholds is going to be more in each than 20 forces spread out between 4. So that makes them really strong. They're good in alliances. They have the ability to get into alliances with Ecaz Ambassador, and they can always come out from a bad situation. They really don't have any weaknesses. Except for, actually, their leader pool is probably their biggest weakness, since they don't have any 5s. 4 is their highest, but they can mitigate that with Duke Vidal. But it's a small weakness, and at the end of the day, 4 strength leaders are still good, and they have 2 of them. Okay, next faction. Ooh, House Richese. Okay, I'm gonna put them in C tier. So the deal with House Richese is that they start out poor and they have to sell their cards to be able to get money. And then they've also got the no fields for cheaper shipment and a little bit of a bluff potential. So I'm going to put them in C tier because really their whole starting situation is their biggest weakness. They don't start with any forces on the board. They don't start with a lot of spice. And they are forced to sell their cards to make money, which is inherently powering other people up. So, and they're also very hard to play. If you sell the wrong card at the wrong time, you might not get a lot of spice for it, and you might even just end the game if you sell something too strong. So they're very difficult to play, and if you play them very well, they're not as strong as some of the strongest factions. But if you do play them well, and you do have a little bit of luck on your side, you can totally pull off some nice wins with them. They're very fun to play. But again, their biggest weakness is going to be that they start off in a rough position, and you have to play very smart to come out ahead. Next faction is going to be Atreides. I'm going to put the Atreides in A tier. Now, that prescience ability it speaks for itself. It's so good. You can see the card. You'll probably never buy a bad card unless you're trying to do some bluffing. And you also take notes on what everyone has. So going into a fight, you ideally know how likely you are to win it. You can really pick your battles and only go in when you've got a good chance. And you also have the ability to sell this information. You could sell what people have, and you can also sell your peeking at cards. So they really have a lot going for them. They've also got 10 spice starting and 10 forces on the board in a stronghold, specifically a city, which is one of the best starting positions in the game. Actually, the best, probably, right up there with the Harkonnen. So they're strong. They really don't have any downsides. They've got good leaders. They've got the Kwisatz Haderach to counter traitors. They've got 2 5s to make it even less likely to get traitored. And they've got good All around good faction, no weaknesses, easy A tier. The one thing that does become apparent is if you include the treachery cards from the expansions. Uh, yeah, if you add these treachery cards, and you also add the Ixians, or the Richese, or the Ecaz, those are all factions that have ways to kind of alter the treachery deck. Ecaz has got their Ixian and Richese ambassadors. The Ixians inherently alter what goes up for bid, and they also can compete with you in terms of selling information. The Richesse make less cards go up for bid, and they sell cards from their cache. So all these factions can really kind of mess with your prescience and your knowledge, especially Harkonnen, because they get that free card every time they buy one. It's going to be hidden. So if a Harkonnen buys a card on the first turn, they're going to have 3 unknowns and the one you saw them buy. So that's going to be pretty scary. That's their only downside. If you have the full 50 card treachery deck and you have some of those factors I mentioned, Atreides honestly probably goes down to a B tier in that scenario. But they're still strong. Information is always better than no information, even if it is undercut a little bit. All right, next up is going to be the Guild. S tier. Next. Okay, anyways. So, the Guild. Probably, maybe even the strongest faction in the game. They're going to be neck and neck with another one who I won't mention yet. But Guild, crazy faction. Just for the stall out win alone, they could be S. But combined with their income from shipping and their ability to ship cheaply and their ability to ship when they want, I mean, this faction really has everything going for them. Their one and only downside is their leader pool. They have a 5 strength leader, and the delta, their next highest leader, is 3, which is a difference of 2. That can matter a lot. Guild has no combat ability. They're typically going to be relying on outdialing because they've got kind of an okay leader pool and they can ship cheaply. So that's really their only ace up their sleeve, is dialing high. And oftentimes they may be forced to. If somebody goes for a win, the natural thought is, well, hey, Guild is the most incentivized to stop them because of their stall out. If players at the table don't let you get away with things, if they don't stop wins themselves or they force you to do it, Guild can be in some dire straits, and honestly that is their main counterplay, is to force them to stop wins, force them to weaken themselves. But, I mean, you can't always just do the classic trick of interjecting and going first and then passing and then say, hey, I've taken my turn. You guys have to stop them. But yeah, that ability to win at the end of the game, and the fact that they have the tools to actually do that. They have the tools to stop wins because they can ship when they want. So they could go first and block strongholds, or they can go last and just doomstack on someone after they go for a win. It's just super strong. They're always a good ally choice, even if they're poor and they got forces in the tanks, because hey, it doesn't matter what state the guild is in. If the game ends and you're allied to them and nobody else wins, you win. Simple. So easily an S tier faction. And in a game with good players who are going to be good at stopping wins, Guild gets even stronger because it's less likely for people to make game-ending mistakes, and it's more likely to just run the clock out till the stall out. It's not super satisfying, but a win is a win, and Guild is very good at securing those wins. Next up is going to be... Oof, wow. Okay, well, I can just talk about it right now. The Ixians are the faction that give Guild a run for their money. They're also going to be in the S tier. And they're kind of like the other side of the same coin as Guild. Where Guild is strong in the late game, the Ixians are very strong in the early game. Ixians, they're going to start with their hidden mobile stronghold on the board in any territory they want. So you can put it far away from other strongholds and hard to get to. And the hidden mobile stronghold is great because nobody can ship directly into it. So it's going to be very safe for the majority of the game. Plus, you start in it and you can move it in case people try to get inside. They put some forces nearby ready to move in on the next turn. Well, you could just move it away 3 territories, and you can collect spice if you move over it. Crazy good. But by far their strongest part is their knowledge and influence over the treachery cards in the game. Now, Atreides is known as the info faction, but there are ways to subvert it, like Harkonnen, like Ecaz, like Richese, and like Ixians themselves. But the Ixians, if they top deck cards, or if those factions aren't in the game, they will know with 100% certainty every card that's in the game, as long as you can remember it, of course. Because they get to see the starting cards and pick their favorite, they know what cards everyone starts with. And then during the bidding phase, they look at the cards up for bid, and they can choose to, well, they must choose to suppress one. They know which cards enter the game, they just don't know who ends up getting them. And that may not sound as good as Atreides prescience at first, but if you think about it, if you as the Ixians have a projectile weapon, and you see that there are no shields in the game, nobody started with one, and none went up for bid, I mean, that's as good as a poison blade right there. It doesn't matter who has or doesn't have a shield. You don't care about that. You just know it's not in the game, so no one can have it. It's that simple. So really, they can judge for themselves if they're able to go for a win on the first turn by seeing, okay, here's my cards, here's what other people could have. Can I do it? I think so. So Ixians can go for it. They start with a stronghold. They can just drop into a city, move to Siege Tabor or Arakeen or something like that, and then they have 3. It's going to come down to winning their battles, and they're probably going to know what their odds of doing that are. And Ixians are probably one of the factions that wins most frequently on the first turn, right up there with Harkonnen. And it's for similar reasons. They both start in a stronghold, they both start with a lot of spice, and they both have a good ability to get treachery cards easily. And for that reason alone, Ixians are very good. Now, the one part where they drop off is in the late game. When more cards enter the game, the discard pile starts reshuffling, you're not sure what people have, you can't take notes, so you really got to capitalize on the information while it's fresh in your head. That's going to be where the Ixians start to suffer. But even at that point, they are still a strong faction. They have their cyborgs and suboids. That gives them a lot of strength in combat and also a lot of staying power, with that ability to have 2 strength forces and then to sacrifice your suboids instead. You could dial 6 with 3 cyborgs, and if you have 3 suboids there, the suboids die instead, and you still have the ability to dial 6 again come next turn. Very strong faction. Also very good with an ally. They can put a card that's good on the top of the deck, and then their ally uses the alliance ability to get that card instead of the one they would buy. It's fantastic. They're a very strong faction. And it's just for the pure fact of how strong they are in the early game makes up for their weakness in the late game. All right, next up here is... Oh, wow, that's crazy. All 3 S tier factions in a row. So, the BG... Okay, BG are the third and final, spoilers, final S tier faction in this list. And that really all comes down to the fact that they have the single strongest ability in the entire game, and that's going to be the voice. It is one of the only combat abilities, and right up there with the Atreides battle prescience, and it's very strong. It's strong enough that I would ally with BG if they had 20 forces and 5 leaders in the tanks and 0 spice. That's how good it is. Because the ability to force your opponent's leader to die if you have the cards, or force yours to survive, is just incredibly strong. It can be crazy swingy, especially if you combine it with prescience with the Atreides. So, best ability in the game, best alliance ability in the game, I mean, what more needs to be said? But that's not where it ends, because they also have the advisor ability. If you're playing at advanced, especially, you can flip to advisors, and it basically means that the BG will never take an unfavorable fight. If they don't like the odds, they can just flip back to advisors and no fight. So they are basically going to be able to mitigate any chance of unfortunate events, putting them out of commission. And even if that does happen, even if they do lose a few fights and they lose some cards and spice and whatnot, they're still a valuable ally. It's crazy. That is the strength of the voice. But because of advisors, you can get yourself out of those situations. You can avoid battles you don't want to fight. And you can even get yourself into strongholds preemptively as advisors. And then at the start of the turn, you flip them all to fighters. And you can get into multiple strongholds in a single turn without having to worry about people blocking them. That's another really good strength of the advisors. So, I mean, the BG is a faction. Their only weakness is they start out poor, and they will typically remain poor. But that is mitigated by their advisor ability because of the fact that they get one force shipped to the planet whenever someone else does, either the polar sync or as an advisor where they shipped. I mean, it's very strong, very good, and no significant weaknesses, but the strengths are it's just they're all strengths. They have great leaders, they have a great ability, they have a great alliance ability, a valuable ally at all times, and that's not even to mention the prediction, which to a degree it can be tough to get that off reliably, but hey, it's still there. You know, you predict like an Emperor or a Atreides turn 5, turn 4, that has a significant chance of happening. And so, yeah, that's why the BG, Bene Gesserit, are in S tier. They are that strong. All right, Emperor. Emperor is going to go in A tier. I love the Emperor. They are actually my second favorite faction at the moment, I think. They might seem very simple, just bidding income and 5 starter car in advanced, but they are probably one of the most versatile factions, the Emperor. Just the fact that every system in Dune is linked into spice somehow. Spice is useful for so many things. It's useful in basically every phase of the game. Having a lot of spice, consistently being the richest player at the table usually, is so strong. It basically means that any plan can be executed by the Emperor. You could go early into strongholds. You could ship a bunch of forces down early and take a fight, or just secure a stronghold, because you'll have the spice to do it more often than not. You could play slow and just stock up on cards. You'll have the spice to do that for sure. You could wait it out, ally with someone, fill up their hand with cards, and then you go for a win. Like, you will have the spice to do any play you want in the game, usually. Unless you play like I do, the broke Emperor strategy. But still, very strong. And then that's not even to mention the Sardaukar. It's basically 5 extra forces worth of strength, because they have 20 forces and 5 of them are worth 2, so that's 25 strength total. Having the ability to have, if you think about it, if you imagine it, 5 more forces on the board, it's so strong. If you're an alliance, right, and you gotta lock down your 2 strongholds, and then your ally locks down theirs, the Emperor can have 12 forces in each stronghold, whereas a normal player can usually only have 10 if you were to like balance it out evenly. And 2 forces might not seem like a lot, but most battles I see, if they're not crazy overdials, are usually won or lost by only 2. So that's why they are an A tier, is because they have literally 0 weaknesses. They have great leaders, great abilities, they're a great ally, they're strong at all times, they will always have money. Because the bidding phase is very important, people are always buying cards. The Emperor's income will adapt to the board state, to the economy. If everyone's poor, the Emperor will be, poor compared to a normal Emperor, but you'll still be richer than everyone else. If everyone has 5 spice, you'll have 10. If If everyone has 20 spice, you'll have 50. That's usually the way it's going to work out, and that's just a very strong ability. Simple enough. Okay, next up is going to be CHOAM. CHOAM's our first B tier faction. So, I think CHOAM gets glossed over a lot. Oh, they're just different Emperor. They get 12 spice every turn for doing nothing. But I actually find them very interesting. The ability for them to make use of almost any treachery card is actually very interesting, I think. And especially their unique uses for different treachery cards. I really like the worthless card ability specifically because of how much it can often be a Karama sink. Like if you play, I believe it's the battle set at a useful time, people are really going to want to Karama you because that prevents them from moving forces into somewhere you have forces. So it can help you with going for your own win attempt, or it can help stop someone else's. If the last stronghold they need is occupied by you, you play a Kulon, and unless they got a Karama up their sleeve, there's nothing they can do about it. They can also hold 5 cards instead of a normal 4, 5 treachery cards. And this may seem like it's not very impactful, but it's actually kind of huge. Because what it allows for CHOAM to do is have a perfect hand and an X factor. So normally a perfect hand is 4 cards, both weapons, both defenses, and that happens to be the hand limit. So for a normal faction, having a perfect hand is great. You know, you're full, you can't bid, but I mean, what else could you want? You've got a perfect hand. But as CHOAM, you can hold 5. You could have that perfect card and a Truth Trance, or a Karama, or a worthless card that's going to be useful to you. It's so good, and it's way better than you'd think at a glance. They've got the Auditor to always be able to basically have a 2-strength cheap hero, because they can revive the Auditor every turn, even if all 5 are not dead. And then they've also got their revival ability. And the revival ability is actually kind of, it's almost a disadvantage because CHOAM has no free revival rate. But to compensate for it, they have half-price revivals and no limits. They could revive all 20 of their forces if they could pay for it. But because CHOAM has to pay for everything, they have to pay for cards, they have to pay for revivals, they have to pay for shipments, that 12 spice starts to really thin out fast. They don't have any free revivals, they don't have any forces on the board to start. They don't have any combat abilities, so they'll have to ship lots and dial high. CHOAM can be vulnerable to a death spiral, where it's just turn after turn of them barely trying to stay above water. Of, oh man, I gotta spend money on forces, reviving forces, I gotta spend money on cards, I gotta spend money on shipping, and oh, I'm broke again. So if CHOAM is doing good, that 12 spice a turn can be really nice to just have the ability to buy a good card if it comes up, or ship a couple extra forces if you need them. But if you lose a couple key battles, that 12 spice is gonna, you might even spend it all before the shipping and movement phase with all the things you need to buy. So that puts them in B tier. They're a very average faction, and they're kind of like the tool belt faction in my mind. They got a lot of tools, and it's just about using them correctly. All right, down to the last 3, the last quarter. We've got Tleilaxu. I think I'm putting Tleilaxu in C tier. So the main issue with Tleilaxu is that they only become a factor in the late game. Once those tanks are full of forces and they're getting tons of spice from revival, that's when they can really strike fear into people's hearts. But until then, they're going to have very little spice to buy cards, to ship forces, to dial with. It's you know, it's a joke that you play with BT and it's a 5-player game. But if you are a good Tleilaxu player, this is me being humble. If you're a good Tleilaxu player, you can do some really crazy stuff. If you can wheel and deal, if you can make the right shipments, if you can force battles and do all sorts of crazy stuff, you can get your economy going as early as the 2nd or 3rd turn. And by that I mean getting like 3 to 4 spice in the revival phase. If you can do that as early as possible, that's momentum you're really not going to lose. Once the tanks start getting full, very rarely will they become empty all of a sudden. Usually, the number of forces in the tanks only grows as the game goes on. And so the sooner you can get them nice and full, the sooner you'll be making money, and the sooner you'll be buying cards, shipping forces, winning battles, just like every other faction. I have actually won as Tleilaxu on the second turn. I mean, granted, it did include homeworlds, which are a massive buff for Tleilaxu, but it did happen, and I have seen other people do it. It is possible. Second and third wins as Tleilaxu, they're rare, but they feel really good. And the other thing about Tleilaxu is they have a lot of deal-making potential because of their control over the revival phase. The ability to just offer someone a free leader revival is so nice because that's worth a lot. Not only do they not have to pay for it, but it's also an early revival. Like, you literally cannot put a price on that. And so the ability to offer something of huge value to someone without giving up anything at the moment means that you can make a lot of deals in the early game even when you're poor, and you'll still have a lot to offer people. That's really what I love about Tleilaxu, is that deal-making potential. But again, that crucial weakness of doing nothing in the early game, that's going to leave them locked in C tier. They've also got their face dancers, but it's a trader mechanic, and it's tough to strategize around it. It's mostly random. But if you can make something happen, if you can call a face dancer at the right time, you could be doing pretty good. All right, next up is the Fremen. And unfortunately, the Fremen are going to be our second D tier faction. And it pains me to say this because the Fremen are the faction I got my first ever win in Dune with, but boy, they are real tough. Now, here's the thing, is that when a game is going well for a Fremen player, they are actually one of the strongest factions in the game. If you were to rank this tier list in terms of how good they are at their peak, at their best board state, Fremen would be easy A or even S tier. The ability for them to ship for free and dial for free, and their ease of collecting spice, and the fact that it's very risk-free for them, it means that they only need to spend spice on buying cards and sometimes revivals if BT increases their limit. That's so great because not only because they get their hand nice and full if they have the spice to do so, but they could almost act a little bit like an emperor for their ally. Because if a Fremen player is full, the only thing they can spend their spice on is cards for their ally and shipments for their ally. And if the Fremen player is rich, that's a very, very viable thing to do. But at the end of the day, they're really going to be held back by their early game, the first turn. It really is going to make or break a Fremen player's game, is if their first turn goes well, if they can get a spice blow and not get a leader killed or lose a battle, they're going to be set up pretty well. But if they go and they walk into a traitor, or they just get unlucky and someone has a lot of cards, especially if they're going first. If you're going first as the Fremen, it's almost like a minus 5% chance of winning right out of the gate, because you'll go to a spice blow and people are going to see Fremen, you probably haven't bought any cards on the first turn, and they're going to think you're vulnerable. And they're going to go and fight you, and there's a decent chance they'll win unless you grabbed a good card as your starting card. Now, honestly, the best first turn as Fremen is to just doomstack a spice blow. Put all 10 of your forces from your reserves onto it, or that you had on the board at start. Just, you really gotta reduce all chances of losing a battle on your first turn. And then you can start making some ground and you could hopefully do well. But if things don't go well for Fremen, it's very tough to become relevant to the game. Alright, and last but not least, we got the Moritani. Moritani is going to go in B tier. And they're a fun faction. They're pretty strong, but they don't really reach the level of these factions in A tier. These are some strong factions. But Moritani is quite strong with their terror tokens. It allows them to put pressure on the game without having to spend any resources. You know, a leader kill here and there, 6 forces from a sneak attack, forcing someone to discard a card with sabotage. It can be pretty strong, and you don't have to commit anything to placing these terror tokens down, unlike Ecaz, who has to pay for their ambassadors. They've got a lot of avenues for spice generation. They've got their Assassinate Leader ability, where they can just reveal a traitor against a person they lose to and kill that person's leader and get spice for it. They've also got the Extortion Terror token and the Assassinate Terror token, which are other good ways of getting spice. And they also have the ability to just kind of extort people. Say, hey, 1 spice and I won't trigger this token. They've got a good amount of spice making potential. And they also have the highest starting spice tied with Ecaz at 12. So they can be pretty good, pretty well equipped on the first turn, especially since their starting position is 6 forces in any territory. So they can be in a stronghold on the first turn very easily. I think there's only a couple board states. In fact, there's no board. I guess if you have Fremen, Atreides, Harkonnen, BG, and Guild, there's potential that all strongholds will be filled at the start of the game, and you can't go into any of them, in which case you'll probably just be in the polar sink. But usually, you'll always have a stronghold you can put your starting forces in, and that's a great spot to be in at the start of the game. And then lastly, they have that Enemy of My Enemy ability. The ability to get in and out of alliances at any time, especially in the shipment and movement phase, is a very good ability. It's very nice. You can always ally with someone because it's very risk-free. You'll always be able to get out of it as long as you have a terror token on the board. You can also be very opportunistic with your alliances. You can see someone's in a strong position and you're in a strong position. You say, hey, go in there and let's enemy my enemy. Let's ally up. And I think we have a good shot of winning this. They're very strong. And they don't have any weaknesses. They have good leaders, good setup, good abilities, no significant weaknesses, but no significant strengths. So that's why they end up being at B tier. And that's it. That's all 12. So this is my tier list. I'm sure there will be some people disagreeing with it, but I think it's pretty accurate. Some of these could probably shift places. I mean, you know, there's the argument that maybe Guild goes down to A, or maybe Harkonnen goes up to C. I think generally in Dune, there's a lot of variance based on your board. Who's at your table, what factions are at your table, a little bit of luck in terms of what treachery cards you buy. But overall, I think I try to rate these factions in terms of what you have the ability to do, what tools you have at your disposal, rather than, you know, strategies that they can employ. Because, you know, one strategy might not work as well as it does at another table. You know, Atreides at one table might be able to sell information and make a ton of spice and have like 12 bribes at Mentat phase when they collect it. And other tables, it's just silent and they can't sell anything. But just rating it in terms of their abilities and any inherent weaknesses they have, this I think is pretty accurate. And it generally gives a good bearing on how likely a faction is to win. At the end of the day, I've seen all of these factions win more than a handful of times, but some of these ones up here are definitely winning more frequently than these ones down here. Let me know in the comments how you would rate these factions, what changes you'd have, or where you disagree, where you agree. And if you have any interesting ideas for future videos and similar things, go ahead and let me know. Expect another Strengths and Strategies video soon on the Moritani. They're next in my crosshairs. And with that, I will see you all next time.